at the start, it wasn't about losing weight at all. I didn't have any problems with my body or weight. It was the feeling of control and the rewarding sensation that you get from restriction. It's very addictive.
You have found the Thinking Mind podcast.
Today, I am really grateful to have with us Ella, who is here to talk about her experience with anorexia. I guess, Ella, I wanted to start by asking you, where did your story begin?
Yeah, so it started in the summer of 2016, so 6 years ago, and I was 13. When really my kind of experience or journey with weight began much earlier, in year 6, because I had this weight to height check and I came out as underweight, which at the time really freaked me out, but then later on would become sort of a catalyst for me falling ill with the eating disorder.
And then what happened from that point?
So fast forward from year 6 to year 8, things were pretty good in terms of my mental health.
Mm-hmm.
However, that summer it felt like there was this health craze going around with my friends and my family. My sister started going to the gym to try and lose weight, and a lot of friends were talking about similar stuff. And to be honest, I don't know if it was actually that way, if people were actually talking that much about dieting, or whether I was already falling ill, hence I was sensitive to those kind of topics. But either way, I felt influenced by them to kind of join in because I felt like it was the right thing to do. And similarly, we didn't have scales at home, so I didn't know how much I weighed. But at school during PE, I weighed myself just out of the blue because they had some, and it came out that I was a healthy weight, which initially I was very happy about because before I'd been underweight. But now it kind of, this niggling thought came in that, well, you should be underweight because that's your identity and that's your body shape and how you're meant to be. So that kind of encouraged me to go on this health craze, to feel good about myself and eat well and exercise more.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of things did you do to eat well and exercise more, and to what extent did you go to at the time?
It started very innocently at the beginning. No one would have suspected anything. I started exercising more, going on jogs. I'd always been quite a sporty person in running. I used to run a lot when I was little. My parents, encouraged me to do this. They thought it was a good idea. My dad is very sporty and they thought it was, a good idea. But inside, in my mind, I was labeling foods good and bad and starting to feel guilty for eating things that I used to really enjoy, like chocolate and treats and stuff like that. I'd never really had a problem with food, but now I was starting to get these bad feelings from eating certain things, which was new for me.
And so did you completely cut the foods out initially, or was it more of a gradual process?
It was a gradual process.
Did anyone notice at the beginning?
I think later on in hindsight, it's easier to realize that something more sinister was lurking, because later on when we started therapy, which is a year later, my dad mentioned that during that summer I'd started talking about, being vegetarian and, cutting out certain food groups, and he later on realized that that was anorexia trying to make me eat less in a way.
And then how did that translate into what happened next?
Well, year 9 started and I was feeling really stressed out about school. I remember thinking that, GCSEs are closer and, schoolwork is going to pile up and the pressure is on. And I really felt like I couldn't handle the pressure. And at the same time, even with a couple of toxic friendships with some people that I'd been very close to for, years and years. And that was starting to kind of chip away at my confidence. And I felt like the only thing I could get some control and, feel good feelings from was food. So I focused more tracking everything. So I started counting calories and planning all of my meals in advance, and food kind of overtook my mind, because it's a coping mechanism in a way.
And so when you said that did you distance yourself from friends?
I definitely became more isolated because I couldn't join in the conversations as much anymore. I felt like I was falling behind on my peers because while everyone else was exploring new interests and things like that, all I could think about was food. And at the start, it wasn't about losing weight at all. I didn't have any problems with my body or weight. It was the feeling of control and the rewarding sensation that you get from restriction. It's very addictive.
That's really interesting, actually. Did it ever become about your weight, or did you feel like throughout it was about the control?
Later on it would. The metaphor I like to use a lot is anorexia is like a parasite that one day just affects your brain and you don't realize it. But then gradually over time it starts switching out your rational thoughts for irrational ones. So it's such a slow change that you don't realize it until whole parts of your brain have just been poisoned, essentially. So at the beginning, I still hadn't quite got into the weight stuff yet. It was just at the beginning, baby step part, essentially.
That sounds really scary because I guess, like you said, you didn't really realise the impact that it was having on you until it started creeping up, I guess. And then what happened? How did it get worse?
Well, I persuaded my parents to get me a gym membership and I started going there.
How old were you, sorry?
I was 13.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how many 13-year-olds go to the gym now, but I feel like at the time I didn't know anything about healthy attitudes to exercise. So I just thought going to the gym meant burning calories and not very healthy attitude to exercise. So that sped up the weight loss, which I didn't realize at the time. Every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't see anything was wrong. It wasn't until a science experiment in school where we had to weigh ourselves and in front of everyone, which I think was a silly idea to do anyway. But
gosh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Was this the one that you were talking about that happened in primary school? Or did that happen again?
The one in primary school was just a normal health check.
Uh-huh.
This one was just an experiment that we did in class.
Gosh, yeah. So everyone in the class had to weigh themselves?
I think you could opt out of it, but most people did. And I don't think it was a pleasant experience for anyone.
No, I can imagine. Gosh, okay.
Yeah. So I weighed myself and I was much less than any of my peers. And they looked at me in concern, but instead of feeling any worry for myself, I just felt this rush of thrill go through me. And at the time, I didn't realise how abnormal that was. So that was the only time I really weighed myself since the summer.
Without weighing yourself, were you aware that your body was changing during that time?
I think at the beginning I didn't realise it, but because I was very much in denial. Anorexia pulls wool over your eyes. Very manipulative. But as the weight continued to drop off, I think part of me did realise, because I slowly started to avoid mirrors because what I saw scared me.
And when you said that it scared you, what about seeing yourself scared you, do you think?
I think deep down I knew what I was doing was wrong.
Okay.
But I didn't want to admit it to myself.
Okay.
This is what I'm supposed to do to be healthy.
Yeah, that sounds really, really terrifying.
Yeah, it's definitely a very sneaky illness.
And then what happened after that? After the science experiment and the weighing and the kind of reality of what was going on?
It came to November and my mum walked in on me changing to go to the gym, and she, for the first time, kind of saw how skeletal I was, and she was horrified and started crying, and I ran after her saying, okay, I'm going to quit the gym, I won't go anymore, because I thought that was going to solve everything. But yeah, we cancelled my gym membership then, and she told me to start eating more, so 4 meals a day. And she thought she could trust me to do it because none of us understood anything about eating disorders. And I promised her that I would, but inside I was thinking, 4 meals is way too much, and I acknowledged that there was a mental block there, but I just couldn't admit to myself that I had an eating disorder because I thought it just would never happen to me. So I continued restriction behind my mum's back.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because you said you kind of knew something was wrong, but you just didn't want to admit it to yourself. That sounds really, I mean, you've said it yourself, it sounds like it's so controlling over you.
Yeah. I often describe it in a third person view. So it's kind of like another beast that, digs its claws into you. But I mean, they were my thoughts the whole time, so it wasn't another person in my head. And that's what made it so difficult to realise something was wrong, because I thought I could trust my own thoughts.
And just to go back, when you were going to the gym, how much were you exercising? Because maybe people think that anorexia is just about the food, but for you, were you exercising a lot?
I'm not sure, because I don't know where you draw the line for over-exercising, because I think part of it relates to more your attitude as well. Because if I didn't go to the gym, I would feel guilty about it, which would be unhealthy. But if I hadn't been ill and I was doing it for the right reasons, it wouldn't have looked like over-exercising. But I think definitely at the gym, I would compete with other people in there to be on the treadmill longer and stuff. So it really wasn't, I still don't like going to the gym. I don't go there at all anymore because it's just a not very nice place for me.
Did you feel tired at the time?
The tiredness would later kick in. I think I was still, because when you restrict, then anorexia gives you that rewarding sensation of it gives you this adrenaline kick almost. So at the beginning, I felt fine, and I actually felt good about myself because I thought things were good.
And then when you had that breakdown with your mum, and then you said you were starting to conceal things. I don't want to go into too much detail about the concealing. I don't know how much you want to explain about it. But are you happy to explain then kind of what transpired over the next few months?
Well, I continued kind of restriction behind my mum's back, and my mum at the same time booked a GP appointment just to see how things were. And the doctor didn't know anything about eating disorders, I don't think, because as he listened to my side of the story, which was very much in denial, he just told me at the end that it was good that I was trying to be healthy.
Oh, wow.
So he didn't refer me to any kind of eating disorder specialist, and my mum was understandably very furious. So I went home thinking everything was fine. And, over the next month, my mum kept trying to call up the GP to try and get me referred to some kind of specialist, because she knew that at this rate I wouldn't be able to help myself alone.
And how did it feel when your mum was doing that? Were you annoyed at her? Did it kind of bring problems into your relationship, or did you want to get help at that time?
I definitely was annoyed with her because I didn't think I had an eating disorder. I thought everything that I was doing was normal. But her telling our friends and her friends that I had anorexia, and I was furious with her because I said, I don't have anorexia, there's nothing wrong with me. And the fact that people are now starting to label me as this kind of sick person, I didn't want to.
So did you finally get an appointment and a referral?
Yeah, it was over Christmas, which was definitely a difficult time anyway. We got an appointment for March, so it was quite a while away. But
when did you first present to the GP? When was the first appointment then?
If I remember correctly, it was the 13th of December.
So it took from December to March to have the referral?
Yeah.
Okay.
My mum thought that at this point I would be able to manage myself until then, because she didn't realise how dangerous eating disorders really were. At the same time, I was still very much in denial. So my mum was acutely aware of everything, so she kept trying to push food towards me, but she wasn't completely taking charge. So I remember we went on this holiday over Christmas, and it was a really difficult one because at this point I was starting to feel very exhausted, so I didn't have the energy to go sightseeing. And also I didn't have my gym membership, so I was worried about not exercising enough.
Sounds like it completely took over that time in your life then. Were you still losing weight, or were you able to maintain your weight at that time?
My mum bought us scales in that January and she started weighing me. But somehow I persuaded her into believing that I could weigh myself and then report back to her. Every morning I would, go on there and then I would see the number drop and I would feel a twinge of panic, but I kind of wanted to stay in this safe cocoon of denial, and I would tell my mom that, oh, it's gone up, everything's fine. So I was losing weight during that January, and that month was definitely the darkest one in terms of physical health, because I started feeling, freezing all the time. During PE, we had the PE lessons outside, and I would wear tights, leggings, then sweatpants, and then multiple shirts and a coat, and I would still be freezing cold.
It sounds like an addiction from what you're saying. The kind of the denial and trying to hide it, and the buzz that you got from feeling like you'd lost weight. Is that something you agree with?
Yeah, definitely. I felt like I was stuck in a cycle of, I'd look in the mirror and see how awful I looked and wanted to eat more, but then anorexia would just swoop in and take charge again.
It sounds really, really difficult. And then when you got the referral, did anything change? Was it useful? What happened?
What do you mean, when I started going to the place?
Yeah, sorry, not when you got the referral, when you went to the appointment.
Well, before that, actually, it was February, and during one morning I was just washing myself, and for the first time I kind of very clearly saw how sick I was, and in my head a voice of reason was telling me that if I continued going down this path, I would, I'd only have a few weeks to live, essentially. So I was terrified, and I promised to myself to eat more. But then, of course, as soon as I, came out of my room and I went downstairs to the kitchen, anorexia just, came powerful again. But coincidentally, that morning, my mom decided to weigh me herself. I think that was a very lucky coincidence, because she got to see how much weight I'd lost. But I remember before the weigh-in, I was panically, just running around my room trying to find heavy things to put in my pockets. But that didn't work out. So I stepped on the scale and she was horrified, and she rushed me downstairs to the kitchen to eat my first proper meal in months. And I ate it because I was so scared. And for the next month before the referral, my parents realised that they had to do something. So they took full control and got me to gain some weight.
How did it feel when you ate that meal? Because you're kind of going against the anorexia. Did that fill you with a lot of anxiety?
I think at first I felt relief, because I wasn't the one who chose to eat it. It was my parents. So I felt like I wasn't at fault for it, so I didn't feel any guilt. But then later on, as I started to lose control over everything, I started to feel guilty.
And how? And were you able to continue eating and until you went to see?
Yeah, I was, but not without many breakdowns and fights with my parents. I missed quite a few days of school during that month.
Yeah, what impact did this have on your school? You said you missed quite a few days. What year were you in at the time?
Year 9.
Okay. So you were just pre-GCSEs.
Yeah.
My knowledge isn't great. Okay. And did you tell your friends at school? Were people aware?
I did tell my closest friends, and they were quite understanding, but a few of them, understandably didn't know anything about eating disorders, so they didn't know how to support me, which further alienated me more. I think it did make our friendship a bit more rocky, because I was so kind of cut off, and our friendship was already quite kind of unstable at that point. So it definitely made it hard.
Did anyone else that you know, was anyone else suffering as well from an eating disorder or mental health?
I don't know, because a lot of people at school seemed to struggle with disordered eating, but I never knew whether they had an eating disorder or not. So possibly we were triggering each other, I don't know.
Okay, and then what happened? What happened after that?
Well, I finally started going to Morty, so I remember the first appointment was just this huge wash of relief over me and my parents, because we finally felt like we had kind of a stable support system around us who knew what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a psychological examination, then a physical one, and I remember the physical one really kind of jolted me, because I realised how much damage I'd done to myself. I had severe muscle wastage everywhere, which included my heart. So it had to pump really fast to get my blood everywhere. So my pulse was everywhere, and my bones were very much my bone density had been damaged, which is something I still struggle with now, because everything else can be reversed. Muscles can be grown again, but the bones that I have now are the bones that I'll have the rest of my life, which I think that upsets me the most.
Do you think it was a shock when you went to that appointment? Were you expecting it, or was it a bit more like a reality shock?
I think it was a bit of a reality shock, because I hadn't realised quite how ill I was even at that point. So I was diagnosed with anorexia, kind of set in that, okay, this isn't right.
And what treatment were you offered at that point?
I started doing family therapy with my parents. So, they got to learn about what anorexia was and how to deal with it. And, we all worked together as a team.
Mm-hmm. Did it help?
Yeah, for the first few months I was gaining steadily, and I felt really positive about recovery. I thought I would be recovered in a matter of months. I was quite naive.
Why do you say that? Why were you naive? What happened?
I didn't quite understand how tricky it is to recover. For some people, everyone's experience is different, but because it changes your thinking patterns, you have to go against, every impulse you have and rewire your brain, essentially. So it might take longer than a couple of months. So during that time, anorexia started to kind of change its tactics, So now my focus started to move towards weight and my body, which started to halt my recovery more.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think your main focus changed to weight?
It's an easy control mechanism for anorexia, I think, because a lot of people assume that eating disorders are just about weight and food, when on the outside they are, but inside it's, a coping mechanism for stress. And, whenever I would feel, bad about myself or worried about something, anorexia would kind of shift my thinking into thinking that I, looked too big or something, which was an easy way for it to take charge and keep, in power in my brain, if that makes sense.
So you had the family therapy, and then what happened? You said it didn't completely help. What happened then?
I did family therapy for quite a long time. So by this point, I was midway through year 10. So by 15, I'd gained quite a lot of weight, but I still wasn't at the healthy mark. When anorexia started to kind of slow down my recovery, my therapist suggested to me to try CBT for body image. That was just individual, so my parents wouldn't be in the room. And I found that actually quite helpful, because I do have a very close relationship with my parents, but there are some things that, you can't talk about in terms of anorexia with them in the room. So it was an interesting change.
That's good to hear that it really helped. How long did you have the CBT for?
12 weeks.
Okay.
But because I wasn't 100% physically recovered and I wasn't 100% motivated in recovery either, so I didn't put my energy that I could have into the therapy. So when it ended, I quickly reverted back to my old habits of, checking my body and trying to keep in control, which kept anorexia still very much present in my recovery.
Would you say when you were going through the family therapy and the CBT that there was a still element of you that was in denial, or do you think by that point you knew that you were unwell?
I think denial changed to not feeling like I was worthy enough of recovery. So with eating disorders, they're highly competitive, and that leads to the person feeling that they're not sick enough when they compare themselves to other people. Oh, that person's been X amount of times to an inpatient hospital, I'm not anorexic enough. And it's really bizarre thinking, and to my parents, they just thought I was mad and you are sick enough. But that definitely slowed down my recovery more, because I just felt like I couldn't recover just yet because I validate my anorexia and stay ill longer.
It sounds really, really difficult. Really, really hard. Sounds so conflicting in your mind.
Definitely.
And were you admitted to an inpatient ward?
No, I never was. But I did go to a day patient one in the later year.
What happened in between now, at the point you're talking about, and then?
Well, I finished the CBT and I continued doing family therapy. But as these kind of not sick enough thoughts, built up, and my motivation for recovery just kept on declining, my self-loathing really increased. And that summer, when school broke up and we went on holiday, anorexia had the full advantage there to kind of take control, and I relapsed that summer between year 10 and year 11. But what was different this time than first falling ill was I completely knew what I was doing and all the damage that I was causing to my body, which definitely made me feel very conflicted, because one part of me wanted to relapse and then the other part knew that this was not the answer to anything.
And how long were you unwell for that in that period of time?
My parents caught on quite quickly, and they tried their best to get me back on the right path. And then when we eventually came back to therapy that summer, my therapist tried to, encourage me to give recovery another shot. But I was stuck in this kind of weird no man's land of not quite recovering, but no longer relapsing. So some people call it quasi-recovery. And I stayed in that state for quite a while. That whole autumn, I was just kind of dawdling, going up in weight and going down again, so just fluctuating.
How long did that go on for?
It wasn't until winter when my therapist suggested that I try the day patient. And that autumn we tried different ways of trying to get me back into recovery. So the day patient was sort of a last resort. I was on a medication called olanzapine at this point to try and combat anxiety about food. I'm not sure if it worked, to be honest, but I was on that and things still weren't getting better, so that's when she suggested the day patient.
And how did you find, what was the day patient like? What was the setup?
So we would come home in the evenings and on the weekends. In the mornings we would do education, and then in the afternoons we'd have a variety of different therapies, like one's about flexible thinking, one's about perfectionism, working with worry, and they were all group therapies, but my favourite was RODBT, which focused on not being as over-controlled anymore and learning different types of skills that apply to not only recovery, but I think life in general. So how to be assertive, how to deal with bitterness and forgive. I thought it was really helpful.
And how long did you go to that for?
1 term is 6 weeks, and I initially was meant to be there for only that 1 term, but most people did stay there for 2, so 12 weeks. But the start was very much difficult. I remember the first day I came home bawling my eyes out and saying I'm never going back, because the force that they put into recovery was immense and unlike anything I'd felt before.
How did you find going somewhere where there were lots of other people going through what you were going through? Obviously on their own journey, no one's the same, but how did you find being around other people with the same problem?
It had its pros and cons. My parents were very much against, when my therapist first suggested day patient, they didn't want me to go because I would be surrounded by other people and I'd be triggered by them. And that definitely did happen. It was quite a competitive atmosphere. But there is also, you get this kind of strange support from them because we all knew what we were going through and we could understand each other in a way that other people couldn't.
And when you say competitive, did you talk to each other about your kind of mental health disorder, or was it more kind of superficial, unspoken support?
We weren't allowed to talk about anything to do with food there, so the staff were very much trying to avoid that. Some of them did kind of, people made friends then, they paired up. I was quite alone during that time. My headspace was not in the mode to make friends. So perhaps they would, talk outside of that and, message each other. But in the facility itself, it was, there was all sorts of little behaviours that people would do and others would catch on and we'd all start copying each other and the staff would, try and get us all to stop. So. And
did the day patient work? How were you at the end of the 2 terms?
At the beginning, it was definitely very difficult. I think, it always gets worse before it gets better. And my overall mental health definitely took a nosedive, and I've never been diagnosed with depression, but I definitely was at the time, and I struggled. A lot of the other patients there struggled with similar things, so I started self-harming, and I don't think I suffered with suicidal thoughts. I was too scared to do anything about that. My family definitely were a big rock during that time. I didn't want to hurt them, but there were times where I just felt like such a burden to my family, and I felt so stupid for having these kind of problems. So I definitely wanted to disappear and just not exist anymore. But what changed was I had all the therapists there were new ones for me. So, every therapist has their own style. And my individual one was, I think, a very helpful one for me then, because they had a new tough love that my family therapist didn't have. So her mantra was essentially that I could be in therapy for the rest of my life and be unhappy, or I could take charge of my own recovery and give life another shot. And I think that's when my mindset started to change. So midway through the day patient, they started making us go like half back to school and half there. I started to kind of get a taste of going back to school and normality. And I started to open up my mind to the possibilities that I could do if I chose recovery.
Did you feel like you'd forgotten or lost a sense of those when you were so unwell?
Yeah, I definitely didn't feel like myself. I was a shell of the person I used to be. So my therapist, she made me kind of list all the things that I wanted to do with my life and, for example, go to university. And I knew that if I kept on, not quite recovering, I would never get to do any of these things and my life would be wasted. So I think my motivation definitely started to trickle back in.
It's interesting you mentioned the tough love of the therapist. Do you think that technique works for most people? Did you have experience where other people that were receiving treatment at the daycare unit found it helpful? Or I'm just curious to know whether tough love is useful for everyone, or it was just you felt like it worked for you.
It's definitely difficult. When I first kind of experienced it, I felt very defensive because, that's what anorexia is like. But I think it was what I needed at that point. I needed that kick. So at the beginning of recovery, I needed that gentle, very quiet kind of therapist who listened more. But now I needed that one who just told me everything straight up, got me thinking rationally.
Would you say that was the most helpful therapy that you'd received on your journey?
I think it was the one that gave me the biggest push. Each therapy has had its own, benefit that it gave me. This one was definitely the most powerful.
How did you manage the end of the daycare and transitioning back into kind of day-to-day life without it?
I was terrified. My mindset had completely switched from never wanting to go back there again to wanting to stay there, because it became this, safety net, and I thought that, I wouldn't be able to manage alone. Well, I wasn't alone. I had my parents and, my other therapist, but I still felt like I was stepping out into the world without anything behind me to catch me if I fell.
Yeah. And how did you manage?
I think I did quite well. I went back to school and I did my GCSEs without any problems. I was given some help with that because I'd missed so much school. But and then summer started and I didn't relapse like the year before. I did, slip up a little bit, but recovery's not linear. I kept trying to use all the skills and the new thinking patterns that I'd learned from the day patient.
And have you relapsed since?
No, I wouldn't say so. I've definitely struggled. I think COVID was definitely a big one for me, for everyone. But I don't think I've had a full-blown relapse.
Well, that's great. And the fact that you did your GCSE sounds like it's amazing. If someone asked you, what does anorexia mean to you, or how would you describe it to those listening, what would you say?
I think it's a very sinister, manipulative illness. It changes who you are completely. It destroys everything about you. And it takes away all the joy in life. But you don't realize it when you're in the midst of it. But then once you come out of it, you kind of realize how miserable and isolated you really were. And that's why recovery is so difficult, because you don't see that, it has any worth. You don't think you'll ever get to that stage where you're actually doing okay. And anorexia sort of becomes your safety net because it's a reliable coping mechanism. Obviously, it's not in the long term a healthy one, but in the moment, it does make you feel safe and good.
And what would you say to someone who thinks that someone close to them is suffering from an eating disorder?
It's a difficult one because everyone starts off differently and everyone has different experience. I think always being there to listen, and I think that's something that my parents had to learn, is that sometimes they just couldn't say anything to me when I was, saying to them, oh, I'm too big or anything, because, if you say to them, oh, you're not too big, you need to gain weight, it's not going to help them. So just listening and trying to guide them in the right direction. I think focusing on life as a whole, it's difficult because some people don't have the opportunity and the support to try and see life in a bigger way. But what helped me the most was seeing that I couldn't live the life that I wanted to with something that was trying to kill me the whole time.
What do you think are some of the most common misconceptions that the public have about anorexia?
That it's a choice. I've heard a lot of comments from people saying, oh, you'll get your appetite back, or just eat this and you'll be fine. And it's like, it doesn't quite work that way. I'm not always the one who's in control of what anorexia does. It just happens, and I didn't choose to go on a diet which caused anorexia. It just seeps in slowly.
I think that's really important, actually. Yeah, because like you said, you didn't even realise that it was going on at the beginning. And by the point that you did realise, you were quite far in, I think you said. That almost a year or so until you realised the severity of what was happening. Would you say, I guess it's a difficult one, because I know that everyone's different. Would you say that you feel like you fully recovered from anorexia? Do you think most people fully recover? Or do you think it might always be with you, but currently it's just pushed to one side?
For some people, they can 100% recover. I'm still in recovery now. I struggle every day with irrational thoughts. I hope that one day I could be, but part of me thinks that anorexia will always be a small presence in my brain. I'm the one in control. So it's exhausting to having to deal with it every day, but it's something you have to do. But for some people it is possible, and I hope it is for me as well.
We heard your journey of how it started, but why do you think anorexia affected you, Ella? Lots of people talk about the causes, and ultimately we still don't fully understand or know. But as someone that's experienced it, in your own words, what do you think causes anorexia?
I think it's a combination of biological and environmental factors. One of my parents had an eating disorder when they were younger, or struggled with disordered eating. So I started to think, oh, maybe there's a genetic factor that's involved that makes me more susceptible. But I think it's more like biology loads the gun, then the environment pulls the trigger. So being exposed unnecessarily to my weight and BMI at a young age, and then not having good kind of stress coping mechanisms made me vulnerable to anorexia.
What would you say to me as a doctor who might go treat people with eating disorders? As a clinician and as a doctor, what advice do you want to give to me to help people in the best way possible?
It's a tricky one, because I still don't know, because, obviously all the treatment that I've had has been very helpful, but there's always been something that didn't quite work. But I think the most helpful thing is patience, because the patient isn't going to listen to your rational arguments and thoughts because their brain is just so poisoned by anorexia. But the most helpful thing that I had was just one who didn't indulge in all my irrational thoughts. So said, I'm not going to listen to anorexia, let's just focus on food. And not focus on food too much, you don't want to make it everything, but just trying to guide them to recovery more and focus more on that rather than anorexia.
Was there anything that you felt was really unhelpful?
I think in the day patient, during the meal times, because we had a set time limit for each thing that we ate. So snacks would be 10 minutes and lunch would be 20. So if we didn't finish during that time, we would be given this kind of nutritional shake that was, I think, 1.5 times the amount of calories. And I think it works to make the person eat in the allocated time, but it also villainizes calories, and it continues that anorexic thought that eating more is really bad. So I think it's a tricky one, because there is no 100% effective way of treating anorexia.
And did people drink it?
Yeah.
What happened if you didn't drink it?
I don't know. They just sat with you until you drank it.
Oh, okay. Ella, do you have any questions for me as someone who might specialise in eating disorders in the future?
I think my question would be, what does it feel like when you're listening to those irrational thoughts? Like, what goes through your brain when you hear someone so sick?
I think from someone who I have close friends that have suffered as well, I think actually eating disorders are the most close to home mental disorders for me. I think when I was younger at school, I didn't really know much about anxiety and depression, but I actually did know about anorexia. So perhaps I find it one of the more difficult, the ones that I'm perhaps most emotionally connected to, because it's so close to home. And I guess that makes it difficult, but I also would like to think that that enables me to be the most empathetic towards people suffering. It is really, really difficult because the thoughts are irrational, but you understand how ingrained they are in that individual. So although they're irrational for me to hear, you understand that they're ingrained. So there's not much, you feel helpless, I guess. I think that's one of the things. And what I find so difficult with eating disorders, and you explained it so well, is the denial and also the fact that the individual doesn't necessarily want to get better. Because if you have someone that's depressed or anxious, they have that desire to want to get better. But when the anorexia and the thoughts are so strong and so powerful, because it can be such a severe and debilitating illness, it's really difficult because you feel like you're fighting against it. Does that make sense? So
yeah,
it's something that I think is so important. And unfortunately, as you're probably aware, it's increasing at the moment. And especially with COVID, like you said, it's something we really need to tackle. So it's something I'm really passionate about. We need to ramp up. One thing I did learn that really, really struck me was that everyone suffering with an eating disorder is so individual. And like you said, there's so many different causes. And yet everyone had their own complex story. I think that was really highlighted to me.
Sorry, I just have one curious question. That throughout my treatment, the majority were girls. I saw a few boys. And it shouldn't be surprising because, of course, both genders experience them. But whenever I would see a boy, I'd always be a bit surprised, which is silly. But I was just wondering what was the ratio for you?
I think sadly it's increasing now. We're seeing more boys and men, but we're also seeing more girls, and women with eating disorders. But I suppose that's because there's many causes, and with social media, I've got my own opinions of social media. Do you feel like social media impacted you at all?
It was good and bad. I was involved in this pro-recovery community for a while, which was nice to a point because, I got support from other people, but then sometimes pro-anorexia people would trickle in there, or would they be in denial, relapsing. So I quit that. I don't know when I think I quit during the day patient, like going on there. I definitely worry about, say my younger sister. She's very wise and very mature for her age, but, it's so sneaky the way social media brainwashes you into thinking something's normal.
And brainwashes you into thinking people look a way that they don't. When you're looking at that, you think that everyone's beautiful because people can alter the way they look and look the way that they want to look when they take thousands of photographs and they only pick the one that they think they look the best in. And some people might think the best that they look is when they look the skinniest. I'm not saying that's for everyone, but that is the case for some people. And then you're just portraying completely unrealistic images, and then if all you see on Instagram are those images, I think it can be really dangerous. And I don't know, like you said, with the competitive nature of eating disorders as well, you can see people losing weight, and maybe people might feel like they feel in competition. So that's worrying. But there is also the positive side to social media, and I know there's loads of body positivity. But even the fact that people have to talk about body positivity is still talking about weight and body image. It can still be triggering for some people. I don't know if you agree.
What works for me better is, instead of, you see the things where, oh, you should look in the mirror and say, I look so beautiful today. But whenever I try that, I just feel really sick. But what I find more helpful is focusing on the functionality of my body. So I'm starting to be more accepting that I can't shrink this all the time. It works best like this.
Yeah. And I don't know, this is just personal experience, but I feel like as you get older as well, you start to base your self-worth on far more things than, how you look. And I'm so glad you came to talk to us today, Ella. I'm so grateful that you were so honest and open about your experience, because it's still something that's really not spoken about that much. And it's so important, because we can sit here and discuss the causes of anorexia all day. But that doesn't translate into what it actually feels like or what it is like to have anorexia. So I'm so grateful that you came on.
Thank you. I'm very honoured to come.
You are listening to the Thinking Mind podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend or give us a rating. It really does help people to find us. If you find the podcast valuable, why not buy us a coffee to help keep us going? There's a link in the show notes. As ever, we love to hear from you and love to hear what you think. So drop us an email or get in touch on social media. Thank you so much.